So this is your evening excellence for Saturday, April the 10th. And I'm sitting here by the fire with my good friends Ben and Andrew, who Andrew is the primary face behind Mossy Creek Mushrooms, although Ben is the primary brain behind Mossy Creek Mushrooms. and Ben also has a second venture that he has recently launched, which is Man of War Manufacturing. So we, as a triumvirate, are a little bit of an entrepreneurial triad. And anyhow, I was listening to a Gary V. I guess it was a YouTube interview with him, and the interviewer asked him a question that I really liked. And the question that the interviewer asked him was, what would 12-year-old you think about you today? Like, what if 12-year-old you met you, how would they feel about you? What would they think about you? Would they like you, not like you, etc.? So that's what we want to do today when we talk about excellence. Is I want to ask that question of Ben and ask that question of Andrew, and then I will also answer, because I think that if anything defines excellence, it would be success over the long term, such that your past selves admire your future selves. So, would either one of you like to volunteer to speak first?
Yeah, sure.
Ben's going to go first. So I'm going to point the camera at him, but you
yeah,
can't
fine.
see him.
Ooh, look at me.
So I'm going to point it back at the fire now. Please continue, Ben. Sorry.
Yeah, so 12-year-old me would have some mixed feelings, honestly. And I think Andrew's probably going to have some similar sentiment there as far as personal life choices and philosophical development. 12-year-old me was very radically involved in the LDS Church, and current me not so much. Um, as far as as far as my development, I again that's kind of a mixed bag. I had a long detour and a failed marriage. Um, as far as the acquisition of desirable attributes, I feel like I am very much the person that I set out to be as far as temperament goes. And I'm happy about that. I feel like the way that I interact with other people and the way that I interact with my environment is very much in line with who I wanted to be. And so I guess at a core level, I have developed the personal traits, and to me that's a big thing. Um, I think that little 12-year-old bastard would have been happy enough to see my temperament and general outlook on life. Um, Even though some of the pathways to get here were certainly unexpected.
So I want to jump in for a moment because I want to emphasize two things. Thing number one, I'm pretty sure that Ben, you and I met each other at age 10, or at least I was 10, and then Andrew, you and I met at age maybe 13 for me, would have been 14 for you.
We met in sixth grade.
So we may have met in sixth, but we became friends in eighth.
That's fair.
So my marker is eighth grade.
So that'd be probably 13 or 14.
And eighth grade would have been the time at which all three of us started to become legitimate friends. Ben and I were friends before Andrew and I were friends. And then, of course, ninth grade was when the three of us really kicked off. So I just, for a little bit of context there on that 12-year mark, at 12 years old, I knew Ben. And at 12 years old, I knew Andrew, and vice versa. And so I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here, Ben, and I'm going to say, so you spoke about your temperament and said, that you think that at minimum your 12-year-old self would be happy with who you conduct yourself as now. is there anything that stands out to you as something that he would be distinctly unhappy with?
Yeah, I swear more than what the than what the 12-year-old.
I guess I didn't ask you to keep this.
fair,
I didn't ask
you
you
were
to
like
keep
the-
this clean, but you definitely already cursed during your interview.
To be fair, 12-year-old, you were like the only 12-year-old I knew at that time who like didn't cuss not even once, kind of stuff.
Dude, speaking of that, and speaking of not cursing and your commitment to your LDS faith, I was the 12-year-old who was like the atheist.
Right?
Yeah.
I remember that. Yeah.
Like that was a thing. Although I was just angry because my mother had died, and that's what it really came down to. Is
Yeah.
my and also I wasn't raised in a religious household, but like all the kids were like, "Oh my God, that kid's an atheist." And looking back at it, I'm like, "You guys are all the worst Christians ever."
Which
So
is how I met you.
is that
by the
right?
way.
Please
Yeah,
please
so-
elaborate.
So 5th grade, I remember in gym hearing two of the other kids talking, with hushed breath about the atheist. No, like legitimate. Have I not talked
No, we've talked about this before. I
Okay.
know this
It's just
story,
fun.
but tell it anyway.
Yeah, talking about this kid who was, atheist. And so I was
That's rural East Tennessee for you right there.
right. And so I was like, oh, that's neat. I don't think I've met an atheist. And so I scooted over and started talking to you, and that was my earliest memory of Charles.
And here we are today, 22 years later.
Something like that, yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Okay. So, 12-year-old Ben would be happy with his temperament and unhappy with his swearing.
Yeah.
Andrew, you want to step in next? You want me to go?
Sure I can, but I will say I was just sitting there realizing that you're right. It's been like, if I met you around 13 and I'm 34, I've known you for like 21 years. Holy crap.
It's been a long while.
It's been a long while. 12-year-old me. There's a couple of things. 12-year-old me would be wondering either A, why didn't I already have a lab deep under the sea creating chimera animals?
Yeah,
by
Yeah, why haven't you already taken over the world with your mini tanks?
That was going to be the next thing. Is 12-year-old me would also be wondering why in the heck has 34-year-old Andrew not taken over the world yet? And
So, quick aside for the listener / viewer, that was a really, really like a daily, if not like multiple times daily topic of conversation for Andrew was, yeah, I'm going to take over the world.
Yeah.
And my question was always why.
right?
I remember asking
I
that
asked
question
that
so many
question now.
times. Andrew's like, well, so I can have a harem, duh.
Yeah, duh. Turns out there's probably easier ways to get that. Number
man.
two, that's
I
not a very
remember
realistic goal in
telling
itself
you
either.
that you could,
Also-
if you really needed me, and you really, really needed me, I would be on my island somewhere, and you could come and find me, and then I would come and help, but only if you really needed me.
So what Charles really wanted was that scene from the action movie where the old hand or the hands that are still in the fight come to the old hand and go, "Oh, glorious one, please come save our forces from certain doom."
That's true. It was totally a self-gratifying thing.
Right.
It's like how badass would I would be when they come to me and be like, "We know you're out of the game and you've been out of the game for so long, but we need you one last time. And if you
Black
don't
Hawk,
come,
we need you just one more time. Like I can imagine it, but
Also, Andrew doesn't have a harem.
no, I don't have a harem.
so obviously the first negative from 12-year-old Andrew is, dude, where's your harem?
Where's the women? Well, it's weird because coming from that angle, I think I'm the only one here who has only slept with one woman his entire life.
Let's keep this PG-13.
Yeah, let's keep it. Okay. To be fair,
You can talk about women
That's-
and sleeping with them, but that's the edge.
but that's the edge. Gotcha. So,
Ow, I burned my foot.
but the other side of that coin is I actually think that, I remember being 12-year-old me and looking at capable men and having this weird, like, oh, I want to be that, or I'm intimidated by that kind of stuff. And, I mean, screw, 12-year-old me, like, 20-year-old me, I think, would be intimidated by who I am now. I do think that there are I don't know. I have most of what I've ever wanted in life. I've always wanted a family. I have that. I've always wanted to have a business. I have that. I work in a biology related field, and I've always liked working with living things. And I don't know. I think 12-year-old me would be okay with where I'm at. Either that or severely disappointed by the fantastical things I never accomplished.
You still got time.
I do have time.
So what I'm hearing is that 12-year-old you is going to have to continue to hold his breath when it comes to taking over the world.
Yes.
Not saying it's out of the picture, but
Well,
patience, grasshopper.
Well, yeah. In order to take over the world, one would have to want to, I imagine. And
Oh, you've lost the faith?
I've lost that. I don't really. Well, it's just so much work being responsible.
That's what I said 22 years
Well,
ago.
you were ahead of my curve, so on that one. But yes, you're right. Like, well, see, I never thought about that. I thought that in order to rule, you could just do whatever you wanted. Come to find out, like running a business and like 5 employees, no, you can't just do whatever you want with people. So
Yeah, that's the like key lesson from the Disney movie The Lion King.
it is, yeah. And so no, I mean like it's nice because I have people that I work with that I'm responsible for, and you have to treat them well, and it's a lot of work treating people well. So like, especially when you know that they're kids and ladies and men and all, folk and all that stuff, kind of rely on that income coming in. So
Yeah, we spoke earlier prior to this recording about how it is challenging to conduct yourself with that responsibility. How you are, on the one hand, you have to be yourself. You can't be someone that you're not. But on the other hand, you can't be every aspect of yourself because there are expectations of your behavior. You're setting an example, you're setting a tone, not to mention there's an asymmetrical power relationship, and so you have to be careful not to accidentally or inadvertently abuse that relationship. So there's definitely a lot going on there with that the responsibility aspect that you're describing.
yeah, absolutely.
Ben, you got any thoughts for Andrew?
Yep. Oh, did you want me to share them?
It's up to you, man.
Okay.
Well, you knew 12-year-old Andrew.
Yeah.
So what do you
Andrew-
think about 12-year-old Andrew's version or vision
I
of
don't even
vision of
remember
current
what I
Andrew?
was like at 12. So
Oh, you were a freaking little punk.
what you thought? I mean, you said you thought I was.
You had the spiky hair.
Not yet.
No?
That was
was
ninth grade.
pre-spikes.
That was ninth grade.
I don't know what your hair was before it was spiky.
It was saxophone hair. You remember that picture?
Saxophone. Yep.
I
That
do
was
remember
fun.
that.
Yep, that was.
So
Saxophone.
for those of you who aren't going to see this picture, although one day when I up my media game, I'll find that and we'll redo this whole thing and we'll do saxophone hair and we'll make it public.
I definitely took the saxophone picture and put devil spikes on it. And a little devil head.
So it was me, and I was in band.
Well,
in
it's
middle
just
school.
it's classic yearbook stuff.
It is
I mean,
classic yearbook stuff.
it's like everybody's got yearbook photos where they're like, "Oh God, was that really me?"
Right. So Ben put devil horns and a mustache and
Oh,
devil's
yeah,
tail.
A devil goatee.
a little devil goatee. Yep.
Oh, the spiky, the pointy one.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yep, I dig that.
And Andrew's mom thought that I was terrible for it.
Yep.
She learned to love you.
She did.
She learned to appreciate you.
She loves you.
She learned to tolerate you.
It took her a long time.
So you had something that you were thinking of saying before we jumped in there.
Oh, yeah. 12-year-old Andrew would think that current Andrew's a freaking heretic, but, there's that.
That's a fair point too.
That's true. That's very true.
But, as I shared with both of you some time ago, don't remember who it was that said it, but the quote was, if the you of 5 years ago wouldn't think that your current self is a heretic, that you're not progressing spiritually.
I can dig that.
I remember you sharing that, and I remember thinking that that was more extreme of a position that I'm willing to take personally. But I think
agree with this as well.
the sentiment is valuable, at least as food for thought, and I could qualify it by just changing the time frame.
Exactly.
I'm just
5 years is a very compressed timeline.
well, so
for
so
life.
Ann and I were talking last night, and I told her, I was like, I am very, very, very in favor of revolutionary action
Mm.
on a long ass timeline.
On a long timeline.
Right.
Because revolutionaries want everything to happen today or freaking yesterday, frankly. And I'm like, no, I'm 100% on board with most revolutionary sentiment. I just don't want it to happen nearly as fast as you do, because I've seen enough to know that when revolutionary change happens on that pace, it leads to violence and sorrow and lots of other bad things. But that's not the point of tonight's talk, so I'll leave it at that. Any further thoughts before I go for my 12-year-old me?
No.
Yeah, Charles. So, what would 12-year-old you think of you?
So I've had time to think about this because I actually knew what I wanted today's topic to be. And so I will tell you that first and foremost, 12-year-old me would be super fucking impressed with how I have turned real life into a video game.
Mm.
Because 12-year-old me was all about that RPG. And 12-year-old me loved the way that you could level up and learn new skills and go to new zones because you've leveled up and learned new skills, and go out into the world and explore and meet new people and find interesting new challenges as a consequence of meeting those new people. And that's pretty much my actual life. And I will say that I learned how to learn, and I learned how to systematize my personal growth as a consequence of playing a lot of video games. I will say it was as a consequence of playing a little bit too much video games. But here I am now applying the lessons learned. So, I'm not going to hate myself too much for that.
Plus, excesses of youth and all.
That's true, but, youth is supposed to only last so long.
That's fair.
Another thing I'll say that my 12-year-old self would be happy with is that in my very early youth, so like my first 8 years of life, first 9 years of life, I was a very athletic and physically active person. And then due to circumstances of life and moving and losing my mother and my father working a lot and stuff, I lost touch with a lot of that. Wasn't very physically active in middle school and high school and even early college. And then kind of had a, look in the mirror and didn't like what I saw. There's a photo. Remember Andrew knows what I'm talking about. There's a photo when we were fishing, we were picking the carp out of the river at Panther Creek.
Mm-hmm.
And Collier, Andrew's son, was like, what, 2, 3 years old?
Yeah, something like that. He's
And
toddler-ish age, but...
and I had a belly in those photos.
Yeah, you did.
And that's the only photos that I know of in existence where I've got a belly. And I'm a skinny person, and I'm naturally skinny, but I had a belly. And it's visible. And I'm like, all right, so I'm glad that now I have gone back to that more originating part of myself where I am physically active and physically competent and healthy, etc. And so I think the 12-year-old me would be happy with that, because I think 12-year-old me was unhappy about having been forcibly disconnected from that part of himself. I guess the last positive thing that comes to mind is a little bit more shallow, but it's still relevant to me. I remember seeing like a Calvin Klein or Tommy Hilfiger ad. So Tommy Hilfiger, right? That was like a thing in middle school.
Oh, a lot of people.
Everybody had the Tommy Hilfiger stuff, but it was like the low budget Tommy Hilfiger, where it's just like anything at all with Tommy Hilfiger branding on it.
Yeah.
But turns out these brands had like two faces. They had their mass market face, and then they had their high end face. And at the time, I didn't even know this, and I recognize this now because I have a better understanding of how marketing works. But they actually sold nice clothing, right?
Mm.
I saw a Calvin Klein ad one time with a man wearing something just sleek and smooth and professional, and he just looked like a badass. It was James Bond kind of stuff, right? It wasn't James Bond exactly, but it was that kind of thing. He's wearing a suit. He looks like he means business. And I remember wanting to buy Calvin Klein clothes because of that. I remember going to the Calvin Klein outlet mall in Pigeon Forge because my parents would shop at the outlet mall. And I went there and I was so disappointed that they didn't have any of the clothes that I had seen in the Calvin Klein ad or anything that even remotely resembled it, because it turns out outlet malls are not where you shop for the high-end stuff, but I didn't know that at the time. So anyway,
I didn't know that now.
I am very happy with my presentability. I think that I have a sufficiently effective, if not quality, sense of style. I'm very happy with how I present myself to the outside world, and I think that 12-year-old me would be very happy with how I look and how I present myself, in the same way that 12-year-old me was impressed by that Calvin Klein model. So that's my last positive thing. Negative, since I kind of called both of you out on negatives, I'm thinking about, I actually didn't come prepared with a negative, so I got to think about it.
Your 12-year-old self would be disappointed at how you're still able to just ramble on.
Oh, hey.
Yes.
12-year-old me didn't listen for shit. 12-year-old me was the
12-year-old
worst listener ever.
Well, that carried on well into your 30s, I'd say.
Hey, whoa.
It's a civil place.
I listened to you speak,
You do
and I asked
much
good
better.
questions.
You say as you continue to walk over me. No, you do much better, actually, but
You're a dick.
legitimately well into your 20s, you're pretty much shit for a listener.
Speaking of 20s, so you're thinking about negative stuff. I will say that we've called the 20s the lost decade. I will say that I think 12-year-old me would have been particularly kind of disgusted with who I was in certain parts of my 20s. Certain parts I did okay.
It makes you feel better. I was pretty disgusted.
Well, you should have been. I was a fat, soft person. And then when I say soft, now I'm a fat, hard person. Well, the big difference between fat me of now and fat me of then was that fat me is very capable now compared to fat me of then. But
Capable of what?
lifting, number one. Of
Yourself?
I can lift myself. Yeah.
Good. Very good.
I don't think I could. I've always had trouble with pull-ups, but I don't think I could do more than one or two right now.
Still, one's more than most people, especially most people your weight.
That's very fair. But I think I would have, I really lost a bunch of stuff in my 20s, but I really like who I am in my 30s, and it's weird how much more capable I've become now. But I think that 12-year-old me would have been a little surprised at how 20-year-old me had flubbed so hard.
So I'll come back to me for a moment and say that 12-year-old me didn't have a vision for the future.
That's actually a good point, yeah.
And
either I had fantastical or none at all.
That's right, and that's kind of why I led with the video game thing. Is 12-year-old me lived in a fantasy land.
Yep.
12-year-old me didn't have a vision for the future. 12-year-old me didn't want anything particular, so I didn't have, a path to get anywhere because I didn't know where I wanted to go. So yeah, 12-year-old me would be bummed out by how much time I spent wandering in my 20s. But at the same time, 12-year-old me didn't do anything about it. It's not like 12-year-old me had like some vision that 20-year-old me didn't execute on. It's really that 12-year-old me just wanted to be left to his books and his video games and his Neverland lifestyle.
Man, I was always so jealous of the bookshelves that you had.
Oh my gosh, I know.
Huge collection of books. I was just like, dang it.
Dude, he had a gnome book growing up that I used to go there, and he'd eventually I'd wake up in the morning and he'd still be asleep. I'd get up and I would read that gnome book like every morning.
I'm talking about that, the one that was like the sort of, it was like a hardback and it was like coffee book
it was
size.
Like a coffee table book, and
they
had gnomes going to battle, gnomes farming.
I do remember that. It was like there was a gnome one and a fairy one.
Yep.
So the thing to recognize about that book collection of mine is that many of the books that I had were not purchased by or for me. I collected all the things in my house that seemed interesting.
No.
And I just moved them into my room.
I like that. Yeah.
So I think that those actually were my mother's books. I think that those were my mother Sharon's books, and that they had, when she died, they had found their way into a box somewhere and not been thrown away. And then I had a tendency of going through that stuff and just taking it. In fact, I had to like have a pretty candid, like apologetic conversation with my sister at some point in my, like, I think I had this conversation the past couple of years. So I was in my 30s. I went to my sister and I was like, hey, there were multiple times when we were kids that I just took stuff that was our mother's and didn't even ask you. Because, like, I would find it in a box and I'd be like, oh, I'm going to take this and put it in my room
Well, it's
now.
one of those things you wouldn't think of at that age, but now...
That's true. But it's, even though I wouldn't have thought of it at that age, that's all the more reason now that now that I recognize how inconsiderate at minimum it was, and rude, and even worse at worst. I was like, hey, let's talk about this, and just, I want you to know that I apologize. And she, of course, was like, no big deal. But at the same time, it's nice to have the conversation. And I think that she appreciated the sentiment at minimum. But yeah, so at least those books I know for sure were hers. And there were numbers of books that had come from relatives. Like I had a children's King Arthur book.
I remember seeing that.
There were a bunch of hardback books in there that I personally never bought. But then Ben's referring to, like, my parents were very willing to allow me to purchase books. You know, there was a functionally limitless budget for books because they felt like books were a good use of money, which I agree. So all the books that we wanted to read, you know, we were reading like the Wheel of Time in high school, right? Mm-hmm. And so new Wheel of Time book would come out and we'd buy it. Although I remember we would still, even with that, even before I ever bought a single Wheel of Time book, we were getting them from Ben's brother.
We did get, yeah.
One of your brothers had those books.
The first time I read
the
Hobbit was
the
from
new
Ken,
one would come. The new one would come through Kent or through whichever one it was, to you, to us. And I do remember.
So now I first come across them from my seminary teacher. She had the full set as of that time, and she let me borrow them, and that's where. And then I let you guys borrow them. I let you borrow borrowed books.
Well,
which
you
was
know,
ridiculous.
Young people are irresponsible. What can I say?
Well, I got them back.
But I think that when we
Only
first
one of
started
them
the
was
series, there were only 3, if not 4 books. Like, I really think that they were at the most into the series it was 4.
No,
But that was...
When I first grabbed the set, there were 8.
No way.
Yeah.
Okay, well, obviously I'm
The
mistaken.
8th one was art. Because I got the full set in a bag. And...
Because... Okay.
In the first...
Okay. I'm not going to argue with you because I don't remember well enough. But that's not how I remember it.
I'm sorry that you're wrong.
I will say that I remember borrowing a bunch of your old books if I wanted to read them, or I had to get them at the library.
Yeah, there was a lot of...
Well, so that's the funny thing now is that Anne is super thrifty. And so I'm like, I really want to buy this book. And she's like, you know, I can get that for you from the library. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. So she's like, so the Mascot Library is like a 1-room shack. Mm-hmm. And they know her. And like, she pulls up and they're like, oh, hey, Anne. And like, they know her by name. And they're like she's a regular at the Mascot Library. For those of you who might be listening, Mascot is a technically incorporated old mining town just east of Knoxville, Tennessee. And it's still in Knox County. And it's not really a town. It's just, it's like a bunch of old ass company homes. And nobody uses that library. Right. I don't know if that's a commentary on the people around here or not, or if it's just a commentary on the usage of libraries in the age of the internet and the age of Amazon, when it's so easy to one-click buy a book and have it here tomorrow.
Yep.
Or just get it in digital format.
True. That's also an option.
Yeah, I always had to borrow or go to the library because right about that time, Dad started his business. And so Like it was beans and rice like every night for like the longest time, unless we went to go eat at my grandparents' house because he started that business in the basement. We only had one computer, the one I played StarCraft on, and I had to play it after work hours, which were typically right about the time we got home from school and finished homework. So, but that's how I got to do all that stuff. But which was funny because even when I did get stuff bought for me, I was always jealous of the stuff you built for yourself.
I don't even know what I built.
Ben
Dude,
was
for one thing, I was
Ben,
jealous of your freaking bed.
Ben was
man.
very ingenious. Ben's bed was a door.
It was a door. I freaking love that. I remember
He slept on a
sleeping-
door
It's so
inset
comfortable.
into the wall.
It was set on a chest of drawers.
Oh, was it really?
And I
Yep.
built a stand on the other side, matching the same
I
height.
swear it was inset into the wall. Was
Yeah,
it because
so,
it was
okay.
because all the furniture made it feel inset? It looked like a built-in.
Right?
So that's because that wall, my dad built it. That used to all be one room. But the wall was built, and then the closet on the other room jutted into my room. And so there was a recess. And
Yeah.
I filled that entire recess with the bed that happened to match the same depth.
Mm-hmm.
I love how much your parents fostered your independence,
Well, yeah.
and that's the polite way of saying it.
Well, so I was on the Discord the other night, and people were like, "Where did Ben learn to build all this stuff?" And I was like, "Are you kidding me? Ben was born building stuff. He had 9 brothers and sisters. If he wanted something, he had to build it. Like there was nothing."
And he usually built it from scraps,
Yep,
or at least found materials.
that's exactly what I said. Scraps.
They
or
may not have been scraps, but they were at least found. So we're running up against an edge on the recording capacity of this phone, and we've also deviated